Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Fraud Boxer. I got a friend here. I got Klas Bäck here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I've been wanting to get you on here for a while. I think you have a real cool product. I'm wearing blue in
Mhm.
honor of you and your company. Your company
Perfect.
is called Pagos.
Mhm.
And Pagos is Spanish for payments, everybody, just so everybody knows how that fits into our industry. But I would love it if you would just kind of give us a quick intro about who you are, and then we'll get into Pagos.
Yep, sure. Absolutely. My name is Klas. Obviously, I've been in the payment space for quite a while, 25 years, I would say. Once upon a time, I had the opportunity to leave my native Sweden for a contract work in Southern California. And I was here for 18 months in the end of the 90s. And I liked the sun and the beach of Southern
Yeah.
California. And I decided I didn't want to go back. And I really want to get into e-commerce. And I had a couple of friends who decided in Sweden they were going to start a payments company that were tied to taking payments online. And I'm like, well, that's close enough to e-commerce. I'm in. Where do I sign? And they are like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's start a U.S. subsidiary at the same time. Why wouldn't you do that when we're starting out of Sweden? And then out of that became a company and a journey working with payments ever since.
So Southern California is the best. By the way, today, are you getting this wind over there?
No, it's pretty quiet.
I have like 25 to 30 mile an hour gusts of wind. My pool guy came yesterday to clean the whole thing. And today it's like completely covered in pine needles and like one of the mangoes fell in. Like I was out there before this skimming the pool and I pulled 3 full baskets out of there because it's a mess. It's devastating out there.
That's fascinating. It's completely calm, actually. I was down checking out the beach earlier and there was no wind whatsoever. The ocean was flat.
Yeah, see, then you are lucky because it has been like the most wind, and I've lived here for a long time too, almost 20 years. This is one of the most windy moments that I've ever seen here. So back to you. Um, you and I met probably about a year ago now in person. Now I've known about your company. I've known Chase Foster for a long time. He's been on the show before. You and I met about a year ago at the Arts District in LA, and you were kind enough actually to have me come and speak at one of your company's offsites, kind of do a fraud 101 over there, actually in the South Bay, which I love the South Bay, and we had a big night over at the Magic and Comedy Show. I think it was Ian Bragg, I believe was his name. Was that it?
Yeah, brings up some memories.
He had a good time with you and your whole crew, and I haven't laughed that hard in a very, very long time, and I don't think I've laughed that hard since, but, you took it really well, so
Yeah,
enjoyed
that's
that.
the drawback by taking your team, I guess, and having a title to a comedy show and a guy do improv and figure out who you are. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was on the end of that stick quite a few times. So.
Yeah, it was like an hour and a half long set too, and it was all crowd work,
No, he
but,
was amazing.
yeah.
Truly fascinating how good he could make that happen with probably 90% improv and the rest a few
Yeah, I
jokes
would
to
be
warm things up.
terrified.
Yeah.
I guess Chase went and saw him again, like a month or 2 ago, and the guy did the same thing, did crowd work again the whole time, like, I just couldn't imagine stepping out and not having a set ready to go. Even this, we prepared the notes extensively on this even recording right here, so let's talk about your history, just briefly in that payment. So you kind of touched on it there that you came to the US and started a payment subsidiary. I think some of the people might know that company and what it became, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
right?
so the company was called NetGiro, which was one of the 3 original European PSPs or payment processors, whatever we call it back then. NetGiro, the other one was Global Collect, and the other one was Bibit, which was started by the same founders, but then went out and started Adyen back in the day. So long journey. We rode sort of the down market after the dot-com crash and eventually build things back up. We had a lot of success in the US. We're basically a payment orchestration. Before there
Okay.
was such a word as payment orchestration, but the focus was for extremely large companies that were selling globally to connect them into a local market, whatever they needed to be, and do local processing for them. Eventually, we sold that company to River, which was a big e-commerce platform at the time, and they renamed it into River World Payments. That has since actually been spun back out to the market, and Worldline out of Europe picked it up.
Yeah.
Eventually, I left as post-acquisition after working with the River for a while. And in the beginning of 2012, found me joining a friend of mine who just became the CEO of a small little startup in Chicago called Braintree, who was focusing on a kind of a new type of payments, focusing on technology-led buying for payment processing. So product leaders or engineering leaders making decisions around payments because they needed software as part of the packages. And at the same time, you had things like the gig economy. So people were building
Mhm.
marketplaces. And then in addition, people start building mobile first technologies, completely different than how you'd build websites, and payments was really hard. Or if you're a legacy company, people didn't buy as much on your mobile as they used to. So we doubled down on trying to help all the companies out there do that better. And as a function of that, we bought a hot little company called Venmo that did mobile P2P payments. We had a crazy strong brand loyalty, and we
Mhm.
tackled building better mobile payment experiences so that you can check out better than you could any other way at the time. PayPal actually figured out that that's where the market were going very, very early. Very impressed with that. Still am actually, and came in with an offer we couldn't refuse. So $800 million in cash. We joined there at the very end of 2013, and then they did an
That was
incredibly
quick.
good job of actually keeping the Braintree team together, or at least the leadership team, for 6 years until the end of the 90s. And we became kind of the enterprise platform for PayPal and PayPal's acquiring arm, sometimes still called Braintree, sometimes is called something else. And by the time that got rolled up into various functions in PayPal, that was many thousand employees strong group and several $billion in payment processing. So long
Yeah.
but very fun journey.
That's crazy. I remember, so I when I joined the space, I worked at a company called Fandango, and
Yep.
we're using one of the legacy payment processors. We were using JP Morgan, which is great. You know, it's pretty much the standard for any enterprise merchant. But uh, one of the things that they were lacking was us having the ability to take modern payment methods. And that was because we were an early mobile company. We were really quick to the adopting the mobile first approach to how we sold tickets, how we did our app and everything. We needed to have the new hot payment method, and that, like, at the time, was Apple Pay. And we Braintree was the only way that we could get it. And I would say that was probably 2013,
Yep.
uh,
Yeah, I
right around
remember
there.
those discussions. We don't remember each other, but I remember those Fandango Braintree discussions. Fandango was incredibly early on adopting some of the latest, coolest way of getting customers through a mobile checkout experience as fast as possible.
I remember it was a crazy thing. Is like when I my very first MRC I ever went to was in 2012. They, uh, they were having it was called M-commerce at the time was what everybody was calling it, and they were like, "What is your breakdown of, mobile payments versus desktop payments?" And everybody was like 5 to 10%
Yeah.
mobile, and I was like 45% already at that time.
Yeah.
And, like, I said that in one of, like, the sessions, one of the roundtables, and people were just blown away. I was like, "I almost don't care about desktop long term because mobile is where our whole thing is people buying tickets when they're standing outside the theater and just wanting to go in. They don't have their laptop with them, but we were always really quick to adopt all those new. I mean, even like the Venmo, we had that
Yeah,
early.
the Venmo chat, that the combination of Braintree and Venmo. Yeah, I remember that. I mean, in hindsight, of course, business model like Fandango was made to be mobile and not be on
Yep.
desktop. But it wasn't as obvious back then, for sure.
Yeah. Well, now we're all the way here to Pagos,
Yep.
which how would you? I want you because it's your company, it's your baby. How would you describe what Pagos is and your vision for it when you started it? Like, what did you see and what did you want to build?
Yeah, and in many ways, me and my co-founder Albert Ruard, the reason why we started Pagos back in 2021 was a lot of existing Braintree customers at the time were really struggling with making data-driven decisions. That was bad for them. That meant they didn't do as well as they could, but it also made it hard for us as a PSP to help them do better with us as a platform. So really say, hey, someone should really fix this problem, help companies be data-driven around payments. They have so much opportunity to do better. And on that premises, Pagos was born. So we're a payments data company, and we help people better execute around their payment processing, seeing their data, monitoring the data, and providing them tools to better execute or manipulate the data to drive better outcome. That could be a slew of different things depending on what they do, but selling more, reducing costs, which could be a big thing, or stop doing so many things manually, or finding the things that goes wrong that it inevitably does, and actually address them much quicker so you stop a revenue leakage that often comes.
Yeah, and me from the merchant side, it's something that, I've seen both sides of it where people kind of just plug in a PSP, forget it, and they're just like, whatever, I'm taking payments and that's all that matters. But when you get to the enterprise level, and Jacqueline and I talk about this on some of the payments quarter stuff, but when you get to the enterprise level is when you really start poring over things like authorization rates on your types of cards that you're taking, your downgrades, any sort of like obviously chargebacks is everything, but pulling levers and what you could do in order to get more approvals. Because when you look at the authorizations and the declines inside that, there's a bunch of different reasons why things can be declined.
Yep.
And some of those things you can change, and some of them you can't. And some of those things you can affect with just little tweaks without doing things. And other things you can see big opportunities, like which we'll talk about in a little bit, like account updater and network tokens, which are
Yep.
kind of the well, not I want don't even want to say new because they've been around for well over a decade, but getting finally more adoption. So yeah, let's keep talking about that. So what kind of data and analytics can I get out of Pagos, and what things can I see and what can it tell me?
Yeah, so really, yeah, the journey of transforming companies, and actually their vendors too, in many cases, their payments data and fraud data into strategic assets they actually do something with. Um, the journey often starts with our no-code integration. So we have built integrations to most major payment processors out there, and a bunch of local payment processors as well, like in Latin America and Europe and whatever
Mm.
have you. Uh, Push of a button, you get all the data streaming into our platform.
And
We
it's
will
all mapped correctly for me and everything.
correct.
I don't got to sit there and pour over
That's right.
tables.
So we aggregate it, normalize it, harmonize it, and create a structure that everything else can be built on from a practical perspective. So out of that, first step for many has tends to be uh, analytics and insights. So we help them with seeing their data structured in a way that they can see their performance, of course, in totality, but you can also see it across sales channels or across vendors if you have more than one, across platforms, countries, business units, and then breaking down the transaction from checkout, early checkout, all the way down to post transactions. Where are there opportunities to do better? You mentioned a number of them a couple of minutes ago, and I'm sure we're going to come back to some of those. So really, all right, here's my data baseline. What is my performance? Have my all my metrics or KPIs, and then track those KPIs over time, and then also monitor that over time in real time. So often you push out code, your vendors push out code, someone configured something, and your performance actually changes. In a way, when you give people analytics around payment, it's fascinating how many people who think that any KPI is more or less a straight line. That is rarely the case. And sometimes that straight
Oh,
line means you lose your money if you don't catch it. So being on top of that means there are opportunities to do so much better that a lot of people often miss, or the data is old by the time they look at it. So in order too late, they can't do anything about it.
yeah. So that's what I mean. That I think about that so much is, for us, we're a multi-acquiring company. So we have to pull data into our own databases and then we have to map it ourselves. We have to make sure address is address, bin is bin, whatever it may name is name, and then put some sort of dashboard around it in like Tableau
Yep.
here, but then past I've used products like Domo. And just to build those things, like if like right now, my company, like we're not allowed to build our own Tableaus. We have to engage BI for that. At Ticketmaster, I could build our own, but it would take a long time.
Yep.
But the staleness of the data was always something that would come up. Is like how often are we pulling it? Then a feed would go down. Then we have to try and backfill that data, and it would always it was rough, but it's what it was necessary for us to make the decisions, and it still is necessary for me today to make the decisions that we have to make at our company about what we want to do. But as we've been preparing for this, and I've been doing a lot more investigation and research into how you guys do it, pretty slick that I could basically just sign in to my processor through your connection, and then the data's there, and you
Yep.
guys get it, which is the no code part, which I think is always what freaks a lot of people out, especially when they're trying to find some sort of business intelligence solution, is like, what is the onboarding going to be? Are we going to be able to get resources to get you the data so you can do the intelligence that you have? But you've kind of
Yep.
taken that part out of it, which is nice. So you have four main products, and you kind of touched on there is like you have the data analytics, the insight, and the monitoring, and
Yep.
then the benchmarking. And I think one of the things for me is the insights and data analytics. I believe you call that product Peacock, which is kind of like that's like the dashboard view, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So that's where I could just
But a
log in,
dashboard that's
see.
actually used in a way that you actually do something about it, which is the whole purpose. As an example, just to give you one, we have a section which we call opportunities. So basically, taking any time unit that you're looking at and looking at any data component and say you have an opportunity to do better. That could be, to your example, the examples earlier, in the last 3 weeks, which happen to be what you're looking at right now, you have lost X dollars in downgrades on in change because you're not sending the right data or the perfect data to your processor, or you're not leveraging level 2, level 3 data, or you're not sending level 2, level 3 data, which means you pay a higher in change than you could, or you're not
Mm,
doing debit routing as an example. Or
that's
you
the big
are
one right
doing
now.
debit routing, but did you know that not all the transactions that are eligible actually are being routed? Do you know why? And if you don't know that, you are losing money. I know you probably have at least three different things to jump in right
Yeah.
there.
So you're actually surfacing these opportunities to your customers right there for them.
Yep.
That's
It's almost like
really cool.
computing it into dollars. It's like people say, hey, you have 10% opportunity to do better, and a lot of people kind of miss it. You give them a dollar amount, it's like, whoa, hang on a minute, that's a lot of money. I got to take a closer look at it. So kind of computing it into a number that is more in your face and harder to ignore, I guess, if you like.
So you're actually doing the analytics because I like that's always the thing. It's like, great, I can see the data, it looks pretty. I can see a graph going up and down. But the next step is like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
What are the actions that need to come out of this to do anything? So that I didn't know you guys did that. And I think that that's really, really, really cool.
Yeah,
So
and we actually even take things like, so there's a bunch of things. The most common, maybe we need to break that down first before I start
sure.
giving examples. So, one of the key metrics, I think if you keep it simple, you have from the checkout to your payment processes, or on the front end of your company to sort of the back end. Often there are declines that are happening. That could be because you have some fraud rules, or your vendors have some settings that actually don't let all the transactions through. So there are declines that you need to look at. As you grow, if you don't know what that number is, I guarantee you it's too high. So after that, you take the transactions that are left, or the ones that pass through, send it to payment processing. Industry typically talk about that as approval rate. How many of those come back successfully? Not all. And of those that doesn't come back successfully, you typically can swap half of them into a successful transaction if you know what you're doing and doing the right thing. Cost data, massive amount. Big companies have huge amount of money going into payment processing, one of the biggest line items of their P&L. So there's a lot of things we can
Yeah.
do, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Chargebacks, as you already mentioned, and et cetera, et cetera. But once you're digging into the KPIs, to go back to my point, um, we also give recommendation. Hey, if you look at your cost data, here's why you have this line item that cost you $17,000 this week. If you did X, it would go away. So be much more in your face that, hey, there's a pretty significant leakage here. You're just not aware of it. So I think because of that, when we come to market and show, here's our analytic and insight package, a lot of companies have done this maybe in-house, realize, hey, this is way, way more granular, way, way more detailed, way more dollar opportunities to address than anything we could have ever done. So in most cases, they actually been the easiest crowd to convert. Like, hey, there's a gold mine here and we want to take advantage of it. And from purely just seeing the data and being aware of that they can do something about it. I think we'll talk
Yeah.
about some things people do to actually take action on changing, but in many cases, people should have done some of those things years ago. And I
Yes.
think often it doesn't happen because people can't, well, there's probably a combination of they don't always have the right knowledge, but they often also don't have the data. So they don't know, hey, this is $2 billion a year in savings. Is that a big number or a small number for your company? It's like, no, that's a big number. It will impact the the P&L of the whole company for the year. We need to do it. But if you don't have that number, then of course, like, oh, I don't know, we'll deal with it next year.
I do think that that's a really good point is like people don't focus on payments and the cost of payments and what they can do to move the needle on that as
Yeah.
much as they should. Because even at my company, when I first joined, I was hired to do a very specific job. And I, when I first started, I looked at our cost of payments. Like I was probably the first week and I was like, well, this company's paying way too much. And since then, like we have Sharon has joined and like Megan that are doing excellent work and have moved the needle significantly on that. But it was one of those things that like until like we had came along, status quo was just fine to them, you know? And then now when you start to peel back the layers of what payments are and where you can have opportunities, but to your point, you have to know that those you have to have the experience to know that those opportunities exist. And like the great one I think that everybody's like picking at right now is like the debit routing and what the cost savings are on that, especially now that it's kind of really hitting the mainstream. But I still don't think people necessarily know how to take advantage of that. And you're supposed to be working with your payment partner on that, but there's other options.
I know. I mean, we run into a bunch of situations like that. I don't understand what your problem actually is. And the problem actually, in several cases, very extremely large companies that are retail or, physical location, lots of money that they can gain from routing over secondary rails. But the issue is they actually don't have the data to know how much will it be in savings or opportunity if I actually do this. So that is the blocker. And then
Mhm.
once they do it, they actually don't look at the data. So yeah, now I'm doing debit routing. Okay, but if you look at your data here, it says 73% of your transactions are eligible are doing debit routing, but the other ones are not. Did you know that? It's like, what? I had no idea, right? So whatever complexity in their infrastructure that's preventing that from happening, which means a lot of money on the table that they could optimize even further. So kind of a two-step rocket. But we see the same thing with network tokenization. We see the same thing with uh, uh, level 2, level 3 data. We see lots of examples in the cost side of things. People spend or hire a consultant and spend a lot of time beating up their PSPs or acquirers and say, hey, I need to get a 0.5% reduction. Meanwhile, they often don't do anything related to things that have much bigger impact. So optimizing your in-change or assessment fees, avoiding penalties and behavior
Mhm.
fees, that really is what is good best practice around payment processing.
Yeah.
So very confusing. You spend all the energy on the minor line items, but don't actually address the biggest opportunities from a cost perspective. But then very few actually roll up all the cost data and look at it intellectually. Okay, what are the components that I can actually do something about? And if I did, how much money would I save? And then
Yeah.
once I do it, am I doing it every single day, or do I have leakage somewhere because I have a complicated stack and my vendors have a complicated stack? Something changed, or just, which is also an interesting example. We have also seen twice a year, Visa Mastercard push out their giant bulletins, large changes. Not always do those changes get implemented correctly. So transactions suddenly change and you build the wrong thing. Very few people, if any, would actually catch a lot of those things until much later. And sometimes it's too late to get the money back, right? Wasn't
I
because anyone
remember
was bad. It's just complicated stuff that your vendors got to deal with every year, right?
I remember the big change for, refund authorizations, probably like 5 going on 5 years now, when they pushed that and, like, nobody was ready for that, and all of a sudden, transactions just started failing, refunds started failing, and nobody knew why. Authorizations dropped down. That was a nightmare, but, that was came out in one of those bulletins, people didn't pay attention enough, not everybody understood what was going on, but,
One
and I
thing I want to add, once
yeah,
people
go for
start
it.
getting a hang of doing kind of using their data as an asset really well, what's kind of the next thing they start asking themselves? So besides obviously doing something about, uh, am I doing a good job or not? Which is how we go into benchmark data.
That's
How
exactly
do
where I
you
was gonna go with
possibly
you
know
next.
if you don't compare? And what are you comparing with? And what was true last month
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to be true this month. So we build a benchmarking service. One of the reasons for that, some of our early adopters, very large customers, were pushing us because we have already 3 years of being live, process an extreme amount of data. So actually over 600 billion in processing volume, or 8 billion transactions. So we have so much data. We can compare your performance versus your peers or the market, as the case may be. So you can actually see, am I doing a good job or not? Across all your metrics, or more likely breaking it down. Okay, you're doing a good job in the US, but you're actually terrible in Canada, as an example. Why is that? And you can dig into the details around that. Or on the flip side, something happened, and hopefully you found it because you're now monitoring your payments operation with our help. But is it happening in your platform only, or is it happening for everyone who's using this PSP, or is it happening for everyone in the market? Knowing the answer to that actually saves a lot of time. And the delta of that time most likely means you're going to lose money if it's related to something that you could have fixed, or you could have called your vendor to have them fix it for you.
That is an excellent point. And that's exactly where I was going to lead you, is the benchmarking piece. Because, everybody probably right now that's listening to this could go log into their PSP, see what their approval rate is. And they might know, hey, is that good or bad for them over the last 6 months? But is that the industry standard? Or are you doing terrible? Or are you doing great? Same thing with, like, right now for my piece of it, everybody's kind of moving from the fraud stuff and looking at refunds. What are the refund rates? What's normal for the industry?
Very few people look at that. Like, you actually have declines to the refunds. Did you know that before that becomes a customer service issue?
That is, so it's a touchy subject right now
Yeah.
on how refunds are. So we, as our company, we try to self-service as much as possible, but we do want to know the why people are refunding, and to find out for us, instead of just, are people pissed at the product, is there issues with the quality of the product? Is there upstream effects? Did the shipping take too long? Was there a problem with the carrier? Was there some sort of delivery issue? Like, for us, we can glean more information out of refund insights. So we track it at our company very, very, very heavily. But also, I think so many people, like, I just did a thing at the MRC San Diego a few months back about refunds, and I actually had my customer service and customer experience guy come with me, and it was just both of us on stage. And we talked about, like, how we always just started looking at what our refund rate was. Just what is it? And the interesting thing that, like, I found out at my company is they didn't really track what refund rates were at other companies. So they looked at and I won't say the number on here because it's, secret, obviously, but it's extremely low. And they were coming to me and my team being like, well, is the sky falling on these sorts of things? And I was like, guys, I've never seen a refund rate this low. It's like a fraction of what it is at a normal e-commerce company.
Okay.
And then what we did is and you guys probably could help us do it, but we did it by hand, is we went down the path of, okay, so we see these refund requests come in, and all of them get approved. Some of them we deny. What percentage of those wind up as a chargeback?
Yep.
And if it's a high percentage, then we know we're making the wrong decision here.
Yep.
But if it's a low percentage, then we know it's maybe someone trying to game the system, or maybe there wasn't really an issue.
And even link that to fraud rules, right? So, or even offers that comes even further in, like, hey, do people that gave, 50% off behaving differently for a subscription versus someone that got X months free, right?
And I think that one of the things that's super important is people that do track the refund stuff. I know we're kind of going on a side tangent here. Is you can't look at a static number of refunds. You need to look at, like, basically a percentage, a ratio, kind of like we do on chargebacks to authorizations or to settlements. We want to look at, like, because you have whales that are buying product, they're obviously going to have more returns, but are they still in line with everybody else? If they're returning 50%,
I mean, just tracking with who is actually the buyer. Do they buy many times a year? Good point. Or is it on a SKU level, right? Like, hey, certain things are actually generating most of the refunds in reality, but
and that's
so many
quality
SKUs to get
thing,
lost in the details of that. So it's a temporary. One thing I want to say about, we kind of got sidetracked on refund, which is a great topic, but when it comes to approval rate, I think of the metrics that people track, that is typically the one maybe that they are tracking.
Everybody starts there.
Yes. But my point, though, more often than not, what they're looking at from an approval rate is not correct. So 2 scenarios, they have more than one PSP. They're looking at performance one versus the other. But if you ask them the question, are you sure you're sending the same data to both PSPs? It's literally impossible to get people to answer that question without a lot of digging around. So if you're not, which is likely, because one was built 10 years ago and the other one was built 6 months ago, then what are you comparing? Of course, brute force wise, one is better than the other, but it could have been so much different if you did it differently. The second one is also, people have all kinds of logic and let people retry, or they're resending transaction. Have you actually deduped the numbers, meaning this is a true count? Very few people have
Yeah.
deduped the data. So then what does the data tell you? Not necessarily anything that you should take action.
So that's so funny because even back in my Ticketmaster days, we would look at retries
Yep.
because we can't count every decline as a complete failure because you'll see retries that become successful. So those, even though it was a problem and we need to figure out why they had the initial decline, but it isn't a lost sale. It became a sale. Now at Ticketmaster, we had the luxury of people really wanted that product and there wasn't really another competitor to get it, especially on the primary side. The resale side is a different story, but on the primary
Unique.
side.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can frustrate a customer by putting things in front of them and challenges, and they will power through. Now at my company today at iHerb, I have competitors, so I don't have the luxury of offending a customer because I will lose that customer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we do have to be really aware of, and we do have to monitor of failed authorizations,
Yep.
how many of them, and I promise you it's going to be less than what it was at Ticketmaster, became successful. So we've been changing things like our messaging and like what our decline messages are to people to try and encourage retry behavior. Uh, it's cut down some customer service contacts, which is the right idea. But I mean, we still get along. We're not perfect. We're good, but we're not perfect. If that makes
But
sense.
I would say even for the people who have unique products or content or whatever we should call it, if you make it hard to do a refund, does that mean you have higher chargebacks than you should have, right? Is there a linkage? Have you looked at that linkage? What have you done about it? Right? Because you may end up paying, it just ends up in someone else's budget or someone else's bucket.
So let's talk about authorizations, and then let's talk about some actions that we can get out of
Mm-hmm.
your platform. Because so we've covered, we can see the data,
Yep.
we can figure out what's going on. We can now find benchmarks to other people like us to
Yep.
know if we're doing well or not. So now we've have the data. Now we know what's going on, and we know we're less than.
Yep.
You guys have some tools to help us get to a better level. And that would be one of those things is network tokenizations, everybody.
Yep.
And then the other one is account updater. And I want to talk about those. And then we're going to talk at the end about monitoring and what can be done to so that we can be alerted essentially the health of our processing.
Yep.
So which one would you like to start with?
Yeah. So one thing I want to insert there before,
Sure.
because often people kind of skip that, but when it comes to actually doing something, I think there's like three groups of things. Most of what can be done and should be done is actually sitting on the merchant side. Hey, there's a bunch of things that you should do with your platform that would improve your performance, regardless of who your vendors are. Vendor choice is important too, but there's more things for you to do on your end. So do that first. Then second, sometimes there are things that your vendor is doing and you can hold them accountable. Like, hey, this doesn't seem right. They might configure right or whatever. So that you just jump into having a conversation with your vendors on the things that you create together with your communication of the data. And then there are tools around, hey, there are some tools that you should bring in and use because it will, as an example, improve approval rate. It will reduce your cost. It will reduce churn, or it will improve
Yep.
your fraud, as an example.
So for us, like one of the things, like after we looked at the authorization, like we keep coming back to looking at authorizations, was well, what are the declines in the authorizations? And usually, not sufficient funds is number one.
Yep.
Now, there's some tricks that can be done there with debit routing that might help with that. It's not like a special thing, but there are some things that could be done that could help with that by doing debit routing. So there's one thing.
Yep. I mean,
But
typically see an uptick in approval rate, but it doesn't always have to be that way, depending on what the data you send, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, and I think that that's a good point. Is like the level 2, level 3 data.
Yeah.
Is enhanced auth still a thing where you just send? It's just sending more data to your processor, so it's more likely to get approved because it's not just address, name, and CVV and AVS. It's like sending actual session data, right?
Yep.
Like about it to get more confidence from the acquiring partner on that.
Yep.
For us, usually when you look at, especially subscription merchants, usually you'll see a really high decline rate on your authorizations on cards, expired cards. And that's where you can get account updater
Yep.
to
So, I
help you
mean,
with that.
maybe some context getting into
Yeah.
that. So, as you were saying, we help companies see their data, monitor their data, but then, hey, you should also take action on it. And I think many companies are now like what you're seeing, which is we have multiple partners because we need that for whatever reasons. We're global or tactical or strategic or security reasons in terms of I can't just be relying on one partner because I'm going public, whatever the case may be. So they have multiple partners. That means some of the tools that actually have big impacts on performance is not working very well if they're sitting on the partner side. So you really need to bring the tools up into you. And one of those is network tokenization. So we have actually built a service like take your PAN, the 16 digits on credit and debit card of the industry, call it PAN. Send it to us. We'll convert it to a token from all the 4 networks, Visa, American Express, Mastercard, and Discover. And now use that token and the cryptogram that we'll give you and process that with your existing vendors. But now you can run that wherever you want. You can do the same structure for all your decisions, whether it's retry strategy, if you're a subscription merchant, as an example. But maybe more importantly, one of the benefits of using network tokens is you will get an update every time the card is reissued, lost, and stolen, which happens somewhere between 30 and 40% of all the cards in the US any given year. But many companies that have this situation today, which is they have multiple vendors, they actually vault with every single vendor. So besides that,
Yep.
creates complexity and extra
That's
cost on how they do the routing and how much they cost. They actually end up paying for those updates in every single one of their PSPs, leading to incredibly high cost as well. So we eliminate all that. Only send the transaction that you want, run network tokens on, and then only get them updated in one place. You can still keep all your partners, same strategies, same logics that you're basing, but just give you a little tool that makes it super easy to execute better and then track it. Because what, as I said before, a secret that many seem to be completely surprised about, you could have processed more transactions on eligible network tokenization bin. You just didn't for whatever technical reason. So you're at 80%, but you should really be at 100%, as an example. So a lot of opportunities to squeeze out more money by just doing things
yeah.
well. When you separate the tool and move it up to you as a merchant rather than being dependent on how your vendors have built it and do they even support it? As an example, hey, I need to have a vendor in Mexico and they don't support it. Now what do I do? Right.
So, and that's I love that idea because for me that does we do multi-acquiring, and of course all of the processing and acquiring partners would love you to use their own tokens, in their own vaults,
Yeah, and sometimes
to
that
keep
is
it.
the answer, right? Like, hey, I'm but one vendor, I vault with them, and that's what I'm doing. It's like, great, keep on doing that.
Yeah, but for us, like where we do the multi-acquiring, we do it region-based, and we do it because certain partners are stronger in certain regions. Like, we have a partner in APAC, we have a partner in Europe, and then we have a US partner, and then we have a merchant of record, partner down in LATAM.
Yep.
And some of the things that we try to do is do, like, local payment methods, like local currencies. Now that can get away from you real quick. So you gotta try and keep it within reason, like 6 to 7 currencies. But, and then doing like for like settlements and those sorts of things to try and mitigate it. But the network tokenization is always a thing because we have customers that travel, and sometimes they're in the US, sometimes they're in Europe, and they're still buying products, and they're gonna hit our different processors. And to your point, if we have to tokenize and vault that one now in the US, and then now it's over on the European mid, also tokenized and vaulted over there, and then they do a lost and stolen because they lost their card in the Singapore airport, and they push it now, I gotta pay to update that token
Yep.
on both networks. And I don't know if anybody has ever looked at their price of tokenization, but it's can be spendy, and updating can be
It
like
can
10 to
be very
15 cents.
expensive. It is very expensive for some companies today. Sometimes they're aware and sometimes they aren't aware. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where, like, one of the things I know when because we've had extensive conversations with you guys. For us, and one of the things that it was on my list here, but we haven't ever touched on it, we kinda went past it. But, you guys help with auditing of invoices. So one of our, partners has very confusing billing way. And you guys can help us with that
Yeah,
to help us understand, like, is there a new line item? Is there a magically appearing new fee or something like that? And that was
that's
something that was
exactly
super
right.
attractive
Yeah.
to us.
We're
Was
monitoring of cost data line items like, hey, did you realize you have a new insurance category you haven't seen before? Like, what?
yeah.
That was probably a mistake, but if you don't catch it, you're going to pay for it. So.
And that's what, like, we had to go back through and audit like 18 months of invoices, like, just because we had to make heads or tails of what was happening to us, and it would have been a lot easier at the time.
Payments are very fragile, but most people assume everything works as it should, which is rarely the case. So. Mhm.
Yeah, and that's what when it's working and people aren't watching, they're just like, "Hey, we're taking payments, right?" It's like, "Yeah, but the fees are kinda getting away from you here."
Yep.
So, can we talk about, account updater a little bit too?
Yep. Yep. Obviously, account up. The same thing kind of construct there. Like you really need for the most advanced and most optimal strategies, taking that tool, an owner on the merchant side, and instead of trying to build that yourself or kind of giving up or only using it on some of the network, we built a solution as well. Across the 4 networks, it works globally. You only need to manage the cards that you want to be managed and get updates on. You don't need to use your whole vault. So big cost saving there
Okay.
by just pulling out
That's
the excuse me, the transaction that you want. Another thing that I think has started happening is people historically batch account updater have been around for a long time, but Visa Mastercard now
that's
also have real time. So people combining the batch and the real time and saying, I'm running the subscription on the batch, everything is going,
yep.
going, going. But then, hey, I have a declined transaction in a certain situation. I'm just going to go out and grab an update, see if I can do it on the fly. And if I succeed, then I don't need to ask the consumer, because if I ask the consumer, X% of those are not going to respond, which means I'm going to have churn. And we talk about declines as payments nerds, but obviously it isn't really a decline. It's actually a consumer that the transaction didn't succeed. So you lost revenue for that transaction. But if you do billing or subscription, who knows how many more months you could have
Yeah.
had on the same lifetime value of that relationship, but is now gone. What if it's 18 more transactions? You lost 18 times the sales value on that. And I think as a consequence of that, many subscription companies spend a lot of energy in trying to optimize the management of this. And Account Update is an excellent tool, but not necessarily in the traditional way with a lot of restrictions and fairly clunky and
So
costly systems, right? Now they're much more advanced strategies. And if you bring that in, you can do a lot better. And that's what's happening, at least with the early adopters in the market.
yeah, and that's something that, like, even Jacqueline and I were talking about that more recently too, is like the traditional batch updating. I had one guy 10 years ago made a purchase on my site. Every 3 years, I've been paying 10 cents to get his card updated. I'm never gonna see him again,
Yeah, yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
still paying for it.
Exactly, because it doesn't make sense for you to purge the data for other reasons. So you have it, and now your whole bulk is up there. Yep.
Yeah, and that's where, like, Jacqueline and I were trying to talk about, like, cleaning faults, but that's a whole different thing. But that's where I think, like, the concept I like the one where I like the hybrid approach, because for me as a subscription merchant, that would make total sense is, hey, here's every month, here's my list of active subscriptions. Hit it, see if there's any updates there. And then for my one-off customers, that have the same payment method, real time it. I got a soft decline on them, hit it. Let's see if we got something else. And can you guys manage both of those?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So complete freedom and tools to help you execute how you best do it across what makes sense for you, right? You can bypass it. It also means you can do it even if you're acquirer PSP in any given context or country doesn't support it, which also could be the case. Or they only support it for some cards, but not American Express, or they support batch and you don't like how they do the batch rules and
They
you
want
can't
that
change
batch.
the batch rule, but you can't change acquire just because you don't like that one functionality as an example.
I do like the idea, like, of breaking the tokenization and the account updater out from the PSPs and making it agnostic of that. I think that it's a concept I never really thought about, I guess, before. I remember, like, really early in tokenization, there was companies that were making, like, their own custom tokens, but they weren't like network tokens. But having someone facilitate the network tokens and facilitate the update or the RTA is, um it's a pretty cool idea that I guess I just never really thought about. And now that I'm thinking about it, I like it. So,
No, I think it's crucial to make it easier for people to actually use it. It's the same thing like, hey, we don't actually process the transaction. So keep whatever you have decided to have as a vendor or change it if that's what you're in the process of doing. But we give you these tools that sits on the sideline that just makes that go so much better. So it's like a little turbo booster or a software on the Tesla that somehow makes it go faster and no one knows how, right?
I like that. So there's more. Should we talk about bin data?
Yes, sure. So there's there's more. We do also have built a bin data service. There are a couple of reasons for that. For the analytical side of what we built, we needed a better bin data. And as long as I've been in the payment industry, one of the most common service requests is like, hey, does anyone know of a good bin data service? And there were never really a good bin data just from sort of the pure basic. So we decided to build one. So we connect into all the global networks, the Visa, Mastercards of the world, but also debit networks, like all the debit networks in the US or Australia or France or whatever market that most companies want to be. And then we mesh that data up with other information that is useful. That could be for analytics, or it could also be for things like routing decisions on how you're actually going to send transaction one way or another, or how you're going to do certain marketing activities, or how you're going to configure some of your fraud rules, as an example. So we built one. It either is built into the analytical tool or companies use it for routing. And we actually have quite a few vendors, so payment processors or payment orchestrations acquirers that are using our fraud data, even though that they can get data, if at least if they're an acquirer with a direct relationship with the partner network, they can get bin data from them. We just have a much better one with much more rich information. And then we had a little bit time, luck with timing, because last year the industry changed away from the 6-digit standard that you take 6 of the 16 digits and you get a lot of insight, and say that is no longer what's going to work. You need to send 8, or sometimes you need to even operate on 9 digits if you do network tokens.
I was not familiar with the 9. The 8 I knew about, but I was not familiar with the 9. And then everybody that's listening to this, you've probably seen QR codes popping up if you're watching on this, but the Pagos team has been kind enough to give away 25 free enriched bins to any listener that would like them. So 25 free. All you got to do is scan the QR code that's popped up on the screen. I will put an easy clickable link in the description of this on all platforms. Or if you want, you could go to pagos.ai/landing/fraudboxer and fill out the quick little list there, and you'll get your 25 bins. You can actually pick the bins too. So if you have some that you're having that are problematic that you're seeing on any sort of documents or any sort of analytics that you're doing right now, you could drop those in, see what's really going on. So please scan that
Highly
QR code.
recommended. A related topic to that, one of the several excellent organizations around payments that I know we both hold dear is the Merchant Risk Council.
Yes.
We actually worked on, we should release very soon, an educational training session. They have sessions where you can certify that you know more about any given topic, just about bin data, very fundamental piece, and most people take it for granted. What we have found, to our surprise, most people are super confused about how it works. You think it's pretty straightforward, but most companies have their understanding of how bin data works completely backwards. So what they're doing isn't as effective just because they're relying on bin data or assumptions that are actually wrong. So probably more people should take that training class than those who think they should.
I bet you there's people listening to this right now that like are now questioning if they really know what they thought they know about bins. Like, I mean, I know I am. I'm sitting here with you saying
I
that.
think it's been compounded by the fact that we changed the way to the 8-digit standard. So as an example, many people haven't changed. So they still send 6 digits for, hey, give me the information for 6 digits. But in that 6 digit may actually be a bunch of different issues in a bunch of different countries. So sending 6 digits give you the totally wrong information. If you send them 6 to say this is a US card. If you send 8, it's like, no, this is actually not a US card. It's a Portuguese card. And it's not a credit card, it's a debit card. So a lot of nuances that now are getting lost because people haven't updated their bin data. And how are you going to optimize your sort of the big picture if your fundamentals are wrong, right? So there are a lot of opportunities even on that level to do so much better. And then, as I said, there's so much more context that you could have from the bin data, or at least the bin data that we have enriched with what we get from the card scheme. So you can know things like, is it a preloadable or prepaid card or not? Is it a card that you can route for the debit routing or not? Is it regulated interchange or not? Is it a local card only? Let's say in Mexico, hey, this card can actually not be used from a cross-border scenario, but if you go and sign a deal with the issuer, you can actually do it from a cross-border scenario. Or it's a combo card in Brazil where like, hey, this could actually be either a credit card or a debit card, depending on the situation. Do you need to know that? Then you need this enriched information. And you need it to manage in the most optimized way when it comes to network tokens as well.
Interesting. See right there, everybody. If you didn't already know all those things, then you're going to need to take that BIN class that he's got coming out with the MRC. So, and that's super interesting. I now know that I'm going to take that. I do a lot of stuff with BINs. Like I do a lot of like 3D or stuff around mostly 3D secure, and like when I'm going to prompt 3D secure, what I'm going to allow bypass and what I'm not going to allow bypass on. Because I always know my problematic bins, but at the same time, the bins that tend to be problematic tend to be higher net worth consumer bins, like the 414720, the Chase Sapphire Reserve, those sorts of ones where the consumer has. I don't always think it's like necessarily like a fraudulent transaction. It's just the consumer's expectation is a little higher because that's just what happens, and we failed to probably meet those expectations. But
3D
still,
secure is sorry. No, I thought you would.
no, but still like taking appropriate actions to secure my business while trying to make the customer happy.
And 3D secure, actually, we talked about the clients that are happening sort of pre-processing versus post-processing. If processing is defined as sending something to your payment processor, I think a lot of people still struggle with technical challenges around 3D secure. But since many people they spend a lot of money getting people to the website, and then through the website, lots of money on the marketing and the checkout optimization, but then they treat what happens next as a black box with no tracking whatsoever. Therefore, there's a bunch of transactions that fails around 3D secure for those who use that could be addressed if you actually are making data-driven decision around trying to figure out which of these can you actually prevent.
Yeah, and that's like, you need to know if it's a CIT, customer initiated transaction, or MIT, and when you can offer 3DS, because if you're trying to 3DS an MIT transaction when it's you on the second one, you're not gonna have a bad time. You need to know the challenges, you need to know what was frictionless, and you need to know the abandon rates on each and every single one of those, everybody. And if you don't, call Pagos, they'll help you figure it out.
We'd love to. Hey, if nothing else, we love to talk about events, so it's always a good conversation starter if you hang out with us.
I can tell that you're very passionate about this. So, and that's a good thing. That's a really, really good thing, because I would prefer to deal with people that are passionate about things that I'm passionate about and own companies that have that passion poured into them. So like, props to you for that. So as we begin to wrap up, I always like to ask like the 3 future things that's going on for usually like the people, but I want to talk specifically about Pagos because this is about Pagos today. What are three things in the future that Pagos is either doing now or expecting to do in the coming 1, 2, 3 years?
Sure. Yeah, no, sure. The first that comes to mind, I'll start with the fundamentals. There are a lot of different vendors out there from a payment processing perspective and fraud vendors. So adding more no-code integrations that we have built is always a big enabler. Hey, you can do this vendor, but not that vendor. When will you do that? So adding more no-code solutions is critical. So that's a big focus, and probably will continue to be so forever, because the long tail of payment partners on a global scale is probably in the, if not thousands, at least in the hundreds in terms of vendors. So that's a pretty big thing. I think most people don't do data-driven decision around payments because they just don't know enough about payment. But then there's another category. There are a few people that know enough, but that's only in certain teams or only certain people. So when we are working with some of our customers, there could be quite a few different teams, quite a few different people that are accessing the insights or the analytics. Not all of them have worked in payments in a long time, which makes the conclusion sometimes hard, or what does it say? What is a downgrade? I don't even understand what you're talking about. So we spend a lot of time making it easier to operate the analytic and the insight so that you can understand what am I looking at here and what can I do about it. A lot of things can be done with the design. A lot of things can be done with information sort of things that are popping up, as we exemplified before. But for that reason, we also launched a Copilot that lives where we're using AI, where you can actually ask questions in plain English without knowing all the many acronyms that the payments nerds
That's cool.
fancy themselves with. Or you can plot graphs without being an expert user on the data. Or maybe more importantly, you have a graph and you can answer for, okay, well, what does it mean? Or what should I do about it? Or one of my favorite, hey, I'm meeting my boss and later today, can you summarize what this data actually is telling me from an insight perspective? So a lot of things that can be done. Just means instead of having 2 people being effective, you can make 50 people effective in the organization around the payments data, which I think by itself is quite a big thing for many companies. Even if they had some insights around their own payment analytics, they lived in a very small team, maybe only the payment data science team have it, but they are not the payment experts, or they're not the payment optimization team, or they're not the payments ops teams, and they don't have aligned incentives in terms of what they prioritize, etc. So just getting the data in the hands of more people at more teams is pretty powerful. So again, kind of fundamentals. That I would say would be a second. I think there's a lot of things that can be done around benchmarking and breaking it down in more and more minute components to help people do better. But the thing that we're getting asked a lot is 2 things. All right, do you have all this data? Can you use that data, you as in Pagos, to help me do better? And the answer to that is yes. So we're working on a pilot with Visa to help actually block or deflect chargebacks. We already have the data. Why wouldn't we put it out to work so you can do it automatically for you? People are asking us for better recommendation. You see all this data. What should I do? What is the perfect strategy for routing here? Or what is the best retry strategy for this specific transaction at this specific point in time? So just more decision recommendation that people can use to drive better and better performance. It never really stops. Step 1 is really, hey, here is all the data. You really should pay attention. But then there's so many things that you can do. And I think you also find the most advanced teams that are spending a lot of time optimizing their payment strategy, they are chasing individual basis points or even less of basis points. Why? Because it makes a difference on their financials of the company, and it's worth it for it.
There's a lot of movement that could be done in all these different places that at the end results maybe a basis point here, a basis point there, but in the end is full points across the board. But you have to know where to look for it, and then you have to know what to do. So I
Yes,
think
and
that's
for those who haven't optimized anything, it's not basis points, it's many percentage. So there are some big numbers hanging there as low-hanging fruit that you should go and grab immediately, even if that's just holding your vendors accountable, which is a topic in itself.
I mean, definitely, I think the stuff that you're building around the compelling evidence 3.0 for me personally is really cool. So especially if you're able to automatically grab and send it, that's going to be a huge game changer for me and what I do with my team and how
Yeah.
much time I have allocated to working on those sorts of things right now. So as we wrap up, we've covered a lot of stuff here today. We have some really good content. I'm really excited and happy with what we've covered today. Uh, Anything else? Any closing words at all?
Yeah, there is actually one more thing. We have a tendency to think about what our primary focus is, which is working with companies that are building or selling online. Sub comment on that, we do take point of sale data or physical data at the store, or whatever case where you have the consumer or the cardholder in person. So there's a lot of things you can do with the retail outlets data as well. But where I was going with this is, we have found out, because they have come to us, many of the vendors, the platforms, payment processors, they actually also have the same situation. At least if they either run the cost, so let's say PayFac or a vertical SaaS company or marketplace, or they have bigger customers, they need some of this functionality in order to be competitive, or in order to do better for their existing customers, or in order to give their employees better insight. So they have a build versus buy decision. We have helped quite a few companies in that space coming to us and say, hey, not just our customer who need this, we need it too. How can we work together to make that happen? So kind of helping the industry as such as well, not just the merchant.
You guys are so much more than I ever initially thought, and I think that's it's crazy, like, how much stuff you guys are doing. Uh, wow. So, thank you for your time. Everybody, don't forget, I'm gonna put the QR code up on the screen right now. Scan that, go get your bin data, go check out all the cool stuff. Right on the top of the website, they have all the different pieces on there. So if anything that we talked about today, you want to know a little more about, drill into each one of those things, grab them, have them show it to you. They have great people that are really easy, show you really cool demos. I've done it several times. I think the product is excellent. I'm so happy that you came on my show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun. And as part of the show, I realized we did overlap also when you were at Ticketmaster. A lot of people were involved in the Braintree PayPal relationship with Ticketmaster, but it's funny how the
Yeah.
world of payments is very small in
I think
reality.
you also know my old boss over there, Mr. PQ, don't you?
Yeah, I'm talking with him on Friday, actually. So I know him very well. He also came to one of our offsites and presented. In
What did
this
he
one.
present there? Oh,
Yeah.
I can't tell me that.
We were talking about, life as a merchant and, teams and how they prioritize things, what is easy, what is hard. Being a company full of payments nerds, people really appreciate sort of the merchant view or the merchant reality or the merchant organization, just get a little bit more richer view of the world. And also fascinating how companies are organized so differently or what they prioritize so differently because of verticals or where they're selling or who
Mhm.
they're selling to. And so people really enjoy that. So just like
Yeah.
you can, people got a kick out of listening to you talking about some of those.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me to do that. I had a great time. Like, I really, really enjoyed that. So thank you. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for today. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Don't forget to visit the links in the description below to go see Pagos, see all about them, get your free pins, and we'll see you soon, everybody.